on the 10th of May, 2018. This is a special presentation from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network with collaboration from our analytical division at Cranston Analytics and our numbers man, production unit. Incidentally, we have two reports there. One was this week in economics, and we invite you to tune into that. That's on the Numbers Man Network, part of the Boston Red Network. And the Oracle of Omaha at 87, another production of the Numbers Man part there as we bring all these things together. The title of this episode is Oil and Money. Very interesting combination of things. And to bring you a little bit up to date, the sanction that were removed under President Barack Obama, and the nations that were concerned, i.e. the Russian Federation, and in Europe, Germany, France, and the UK. These are against the Iranian Islamic Republic. And for those, a little bit of the history there, sanctions have been on the Iranian Islamic Republic since the after the Cod administration during Reagan, etc. That goes back roughly 35 years plus. And of course they were removed under the agreement put forward by as one part of it, I should say, the Obama administration. And DJ Trump on the campaign trail said that he would cancel the agreement. In fact, he did, as a part of his American First nationalistic program. That being certain, and contracts that are in place now will end anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And then, of course, the Iranian oil for many of their customers would be off the table. There are contracts with like Boeing's out of Seattle, out of Chicago now. Their contract would be null and void, and with Airbus and several other contracts. Part of the mechanism here would be very interesting. Many of these services, particularly petroleum, is governed by the dollar. Now, there are moves on the way on two different fronts, with the Russian Federation moving for a different currency arrangement. In other words, what they call standby currency would have another current, and China also. Now, again, this is, when you look at China and wherever India plays in here with the Russian Federation, that is basically a total of the world's population. Venezuela's talked also about a cryptocurrency. Have you noticed our coverage of the Berkshire Hathaway conference in annual meeting, I guess you should call it, in Omaha, Nebraska? That is the Woodstock for quote-unquote capitalists. I would say a small capitalist. But nonetheless, the issue of Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, came up. Of course, Mr. Buffett didn't think very much of it, nor his sidekick, Charlie Munger. But they are around, and there are various types, various exchanges. And in Venezuela, the idea was to back it up by literally the government. In the Russian Federation and some others of using their economic wherewithal, and in China to back it up even by gold. So it depends on what they're backed up and how they're implemented. For those that remember a few years ago, before the murder of Colonel Gaddafi, Libya was moving towards their own currency, backed up by their petroleum reserves and net worth of nations, and that's what usually happens. When you look at the dollar, it is backed up by the total GMP, etc., of the United States. and that has been for a long time one of the currencies, or the basic currency that, as a backup currency that the world goes by. There are several of us out there also, but the dollar's time is short as far as being the reserve currency. We use the word reserve currency. Now, this is just one of the issues here that is moving on, and we'll get to the economics of this, Brent crude, etc., moving up. We'll get that from the Reuters agency, where Brent crude is today, and what the stock market has done, various machinations. There's a so-called stage. This is in the stock market, particularly in New York, Dow Jones, that when you quote-unquote have counterproductive or bad news, the market just sort of winks and moves on. But that cannot happen on a continual basis. Now, as far as the Trump sanctions against Iran are concerned, those sanctions are there, or will be there, and will be in place. How that will affect the EU, we don't know at this point in time. For example, and I think, let me add France. I think I added France, the UK, Germany, etc., in that particular order, how it will affect them. Now, and also you have Japan in the mix there, and several others that literally depend on Iranian oil. They are number 3, I believe, in the OPEC pecking order. Now, with them basically on the sideline, I mean, there'll be some that'll leak out of there, but basically on the sideline, that has to be made up. And given that normally these future contracts are at least 3 months, so we're talking about the summer driving season in the U.S. and many, many other things, such as things shipped by Amazon, etc., that will add to the price. Now, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of a globalized economy by the Trump people, that they assume they can negotiate this from a position of power. That may or may not be. That's sort of bringing game theory into the scenario on steroids. Bolton, before he's the National Security Advisor, has came up with various ideas, and one of his big ideas was weapons of mass destruction. Well, that fell apart, but if you recall, that was on G.W. Bush, and effectively put G.W. Bush's administration, before the Depression hit him, in peril. And of course, when the Senator McCain, who is now battling a brain cancer, ran in 2008 and was defeated by then Senator Barack Obama of Illinois. Much of that, the war, in Baghdad, the Baghdad War, the war, or actually conflict in Afghanistan, or the Kabul War, what do you want to call it, played into the scenario. And these miscalculations showed up there. Let me just get the economic part, and then we'll go to the Mideast, and we'll use the Jerusalem Post there, and we'll fall back upon the Times of Israel and Haaretz, which is the military paper. I believe they play in here also. And one of the things is to come out of there, but let's just get to a little bit of the economic consequences here of what is happening in a widening conflict in the Mideast between Iran and Israel. So let's get to the price of petrol. Hit a 3-week high. This is the world stocks hit a 3-week high and turned a positive for this year's rising price of oil. Gives energy firms a shot in the arm that counters efforts of increased political uncertainty. Brent crude rose to a 3.5-year high of $77.89 over a night fear of disruptions there, and also the withdrawal from the nuclear accord with Iran. That was the 2015 accord. by DJ Trump. The dollar, meanwhile, eased slightly from a 2018 high. April's inflation numbers on Thursday as the currency markets eye the Bank of England, and they will probably raise their rates. It's difficult to know what the principal drivers are given. There's a host of events, but it could be well that the effects of oil prices on resource companies is outweighing the negative elsewhere. That is from Philip Shaw, Investec economist there anyway. So as part of what is going on, energy shares are led in the Asian markets, pushing the 47-country MSCI World Equity Index to its highest level in 3 weeks. So it's one of the indexes here. We won't go into Italian government debt, also sold off sharply with the 10-year yield hitting a 7-week high there as Italy's five-star movement and the far-right League moved closer to forming a government of anti-establishment parties, sort of akin to American First and others there. The Federal Reserve, that is in the U.S., remains the only major central bank to be on course for hiking rates, with New Zealand's Reserve Bank saying it would keep the official cash rate, that's the OCR, at 1.7%. Most of these are around 1.7%, below 2%. Is usually what they're doing. Brent crude futures were up 0.8% to $77.60 a barrel, the highest since November of 2014. Building gains of about 3%. This is the American light crude was up 0.6 at $71. Now, as far as our models are concerned, we see a major impact when it's north of $100 a barrel, say $110 to $120 range. And given that these are 60, 90-day contracts, we are in Q2 now. That would be into Q3. But bear in mind that in a modern industrial capitalist society such as the U.S., consumers come in, or consumer spending comes in at 70% of the economy. It's the same thing in the EU. So we have some problems coming here. So again, that is the money, with the oil, the geopolitical politics all playing in. Let's go to the Mideast now, and we'll start clearing up some of this from the standpoint in the Mideast itself. Now, let me see where we're starting here to make sure we're... Oh, whoops. This is the times of Israel. Fire in the Sky, 7 Things to Know. For May the 10th is the article here, and we'll get to those. The launch of 20 Iranian missiles at Israeli military sites, and Israel's punishing response is called the most extensive confrontation in Syria since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. The volleys came as a little surprise, being launched after numerous warnings from the Israeli Defense Forces that the Iranians were going to try something. Likewise, the response was a little surprise, as Israel had vowed to hit them back hard. Ynet website called the Overnight Exchanges, the start of Israeli-Iran war. On Thursday morning, the Defense Minister Labrador Lieberman, I hope I pronounced her name right, told Haaretz, that is the security conference, that Israel's response had destroyed nearly all of Iran's military infrastructure during the overnight raid. Astute observers will note that, though the military said something similar following the last major confrontation between the foe and yet another, apparently from Iran to send much more northern Israelis skirting. That is around the Golan Heights. While the army is saying that the counterattack set the Iranian military entrenchment in Syria back by several months, Haaretz correspondent Amos Harel, I suppose, counsels leaders against being too hasty. We can only hope that the gratuitous revealing in our invidious would Rosalind's want to come up reminding us of then the president boasting about this. This was President Omer boasting about the Operation Density. This was called Friday night, when the Israeli Air Force claimed to take out all of Hezbollah's long-range missile launchers and rockets on the second night of the second Lebanese war. That was in 2006. In Israel, the Iranian attack is being presented as a future, the word used in Haaretz, with the army reporting that 4 rockets were shot down and the rest fell in Syria. On the other side of the fence, Syria and the Iranians are reporting on supported Israeli failures with the official Damascus, what they call mouthpiece here, center being quoted in the Iranian media, saying that the Israeli missiles were downed one after another. The Russian government funded Sputnik, meanwhile reported that some 30 out of 50 missiles fired by Israel at Iranian targets in Syria were knocked down by the air defenses, casting doubt on Lieberman's claim. 3 Hezbollah mouthpiece Manah quoted the deputy head of the Iranian Security Council as denying Tehran had any involvement in the missile attack, but mostly were not buying it. Anyway, most are not buying it. The Washington Post, now this is from Israel, but some are trying to exchange to U.S. President D.J. Trump's decision to pull out of the nuclear deal, while others mean Iran has a lesser used by retaliating. The move adds weight to hardliners the Islamic Republic. Similarly, David Horowitz writes that changing from day to day, the ruthless Iranian administration may well be made the most dangerous. But the timing of Thursday morning, the barrage may have been coincidental. The army is quoted in Yadofa as saying that it would be has been working over the last several weeks to disrupt Iranian attack plans, including blowing up time-ticking bombs. The preemptive attacks may have included a strike on installation in Syria Tuesday night, according to the brevity of cryptic and mostly on source reports. Because of the timing of Thursday morning's barrage comes just after midnight, when most dailies close. The little coverage there coming out. The Times of Israel's Avi Izrof asked whether the next battle will be with Hezbollah, with the IROC commander there, Saman Amani, asked the powerful Lebanese proxy to step up against Israel. U.S. State Department official Andrew Peck tells that the Trump administration consulted with Israel before announcing the deal pullout. Anyway, this is the rest of it here, and let's move on. This is from Haaretz itself. Iran's entrenchment in Syria set back months after the most extensive strike in decades. This is their take on it. Struck dozens of Iranian military sites. Tehran could still use its big guns, but Hezbollah is likely to reconsider its policy. This is their take on it from Haaretz. This is this is from Amos Harel. Here, the analysis, and let's see if we get any more of this. Well, we can't unless we subscribe to Haaretz. Oh well, so much for that one. That was just basically analysis here. And what we have here, this Jerusalem Post, Netanyahu sees Putin in Moscow, attends a Victory Day celebration there. It should have up on our Facebook the victory celebration here that was attended by Bibi Netanyahu. And we'll try to get a picture of Bibi Netanyahu and the Russian President I Putin. Very interesting situation here. Stood alongside the President Vladimir Putin and the Siberian President Alexander Vichasa. Anyway, at a parade in Moscow's Red Square commemorating the 73rd anniversary of the Russian victory over Nazi Germany. They should remember this. V.I. Putin had personally invited the premier, Bibi Netanyahu, to participate alongside him in the events of the Russian annual Victory Day. They used to have this during May Day, but they also have that. Following the parade, the leaders attended a wreath-laying ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown, soldiers in memory of soldiers of the Red Army who fell in the Great Patriotic World War II. Part of the annual event is making the Soviet Union's World War II victory over the Nazis. Putin looked on as thousands of troops paraded by him, and Putin, whose relations with the West are on a hostile trajectory. This is kind of interesting how these various forces are coalescing here. Bibi Netanyahu has V.I. Putin there, and he is in Moscow, and at the same time the Iranian Republic and the Israelis on the Golan Heights are actually at a war level that has not been seen, according to the Israeli interpretation, since Yom Kippur. So this in itself is a very, very interesting situation and in what is actually going on here. And another little story here is Nazelis Banks. I will never again go to Israel. And she is an entertainer, I assume, here. And this, we started this off with the Jerusalem Post and the attacks, is how the Israeli media is covering this. Attacks dozens of Iranian targets in Syria. And basically it's the same headline here, and it shows some Israeli types here on a guard. On the 10th standing a guard here, and unfortunately I can't get you this struck. According to this one, 50 Iranian targets in Syria after about 20 rockets fell in the Golan Heights area this morning by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quad Force. That is what the IDF, that's the Israeli Defense Force. All targets belong to them, they said, and various groupings here. Incoming rocket sirens were activated at 12:10 in the morning. That's in the northern Golan Heights community of Mejara Shama. communities. I'm sorry, El Rom and various others. There were no damage there. They were intercepted, according to the Israeli Defense Force, by the Great Dome missile system. The IDF has engaged in widespread disruptions of operations attempted by the Quad forces to carry out offense against the Zionist state. It is highly prepared for a variety of scenarios and will continue to act as necessary for the safety of the Zionist state. Our words, not theirs. Israel has been preparing for direct attacks of the Quad forces since mid-April in response to a strike allegedly carried out by the Jewish state. The same words they used here. Anyway, the Jerusalem Post visited the area early on Wednesday and witnessed a heavy and visible police presence on highways leading to northern Israel. And, of course, there were also blockades by the army on much of those Route 98 in Golan. The Golan Heights, which had been in dispute for a very, very long time here. So some of what is going on, we'll get this. You'll get this on some of our Twitter feeds on our economics. What is it? 2010. That's our basic one for the numbers man, a part of our presentation, and also it will filter over to Boston Red via the Cranston Facebook feed. Sort of interchange here. It takes a little while for us to get some of these stories over, but eventually they will end up there that are not there. But you can go to the Jerusalem Post is the easiest way of doing it, and you will find the information there. One of the things I found out a number of years ago from a class I was taking in or on foreign relations from a Zionist that was there. He was an Israeli. That he only listened to media out of the Mideast, such as Haaretz or the Jerusalem Post. At times of Israel, he really didn't pay any attention to the U.S. media. Anyway, we'll change our course here now and check our time as we sort of move on a bit here and look at the we're getting to the point we almost do sports. Let's see if we can. Okay, let's go to Hawaii and the volcanic activity there. Evacuations are broadens on the Big Island, as they say. We just listen to a little bit of this.
Area of serious concern. Civil defense officials say it appears to be heading east toward Puna geothermal venture, but the state says there is no imminent danger to the area. The efforts they're taking to mitigate threats.
An explosion sends dark plumes into the sky, while geologists say this may be a sign of more to come.
Steady trade winds continue across much of the state, so the air quality is good except for on the Big Island. However, lighter winds are due in soon, although fog might not be a problem for us. I'll tell you why coming up.
Plus, a remarkable road to recovery.
I had a compound fracture in my arm.
How this triathlete is coming back from a crash and the actions the city is taking to stop drifters.
In high definition, from KGMB and KHNL, this is your source for breaking news. Hawaii News Now at 5.
We are tracking two developing situations on the Big Island tonight. At Halima'uma'u Crater, a giant plume shot up at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. The big concern that the lava lake could drop below the water table, setting off an explosive eruption.
And at Leilani Estates and Lanipuna Gardens, another fissure opens as the line of eruptions gets closer to the Puna geothermal venture. That fissure caused more emergency evacuations in the area. This is on the south side of Poho'iki Road and Leilani Leilani Avenue.
Yeah, it's in the same area where a water main ruptured. It's actually less than a mile away from the Puna geothermal venture plant. Hawaii County Civil Defense says the eruptions have left at least 9 roads impassable.
Highway 130 between Malama Street and Kama'ili Road and Poho'iki Road between Highway 132 and Hinalo Street are closed. We've also learned that the Hawaii National Guard is beefing up patrols in Leilani Estates. Residents there are worried about looting. At least one person was arrested accused of burglarizing a home that had been evacuated.
We have team coverage tonight of the story, and we begin with Mileka Lincoln for the very latest on the eruptions. Mileka.
Aloha, Sean. Yes, Hawaii County Civil Defense Agency officials confirmed a 15th fissure had developed on the south side of Poho'iki Road and Leilani Avenue just after 1 o'clock this afternoon. Now, what we are waiting to hear from civil defense officials is exactly how fast that flow front is moving. And because we have not been provided with that information yet, it's unclear exactly where it is right now. But again, that fissure, we are told, was heading east, and that is in the direction of the Puna geothermal venture plant. And that, of course, is a major concern for residents who are aware of the 60,000 gallons of pentane which are being stored on that plant property, a highly flammable liquid that is stored on site. Some families who live within a mile of that PGV property radius say they aren't taking any chances and have volunteered to evacuate because of rising concerns about their safety, which they say has been escalated by a lack of information.
That's scary. When everybody that you talk to who knows someone who works at PGV says they're not being told anything. Everything seems to be going on under the cover of secrecy, a lack of clarity. Even on PGV's website this morning, there's no update at all. They don't even acknowledge what's going on.
Now, we were at Highway 130 and Pahoa Kapoho Road when we saw a truck which sources tell us was transporting pentane away from the PGV property this afternoon. Civil Defense Administrator Talmadge Magno says crews would be relocating 12,000 gallons of pentane to Shipman Industrial in Kea'au today. But we have heard from sources who say at this point approximately 30,000 gallons of pentane have already been moved off the site, and that the remaining pentane would be evacuated in the next 10 to 12 hours. I also spoke with hazmat sources who say pentane's chemical characteristics are rather similar to gasoline, including their flammable range. From a fire standpoint, that means the hazards would be similar in terms of how gasoline burns. Pentane's potential threat, I'm told, would be dependent on what kind of container it's being stored in. If it can vent and burn, then even if crews weren't able to move it from the PGV site before the lava flow reaches it, it would simply create, I'm told, a big fireball if ignited, not an explosion similar to a bomb. And again, that's because I'm told it has the same chemical composition as gasoline. Now, I'm also cautioned that this would be a different story if for some reason the pentane is being stored in a pressurized container. Hazmat experts say a reference they're using to determine the potential threat is the DOT's emergency response guide. Now, neither pentane nor gasoline have requirements within that response guide that mandate an evacuation or response zone. In other words, the hazard is not as severe as other chemicals, meaning there is not a required isolation zone. However, in an abundance of caution, Hawaii County Civil Defense Administrator Magno says they are telling folks that that radius is going to be just outside of the 1 mile that they can tell people they believe is safe. Of course, this situation is continuing to develop, and we will bring you the very latest as it does. Reporting live here in Pahoa, Mileka Lincoln, Hawaii News Now.
All right, thank you very much, Mileka. And the latest vent to open sent families fleeing from the area. Take a look at this video from a Lani Puna Gardens resident who had to pack up their belongings and leave their home behind. They were ordered to evacuate as sulfur dioxide filled the air.
First we heard the siren, then they personally came to each house and said evacuate, evacuate, evacuate.
Street was alive with emergency vehicles, and we were told nobody was being let in. That's it.
Officials are closely monitoring the air quality in that area, but families are still waiting and watching for their next opportunity to return home.
Meantime, as Mileko mentioned earlier, efforts are underway to quickly remove pentane gas from the Puna geothermal venture power plant. The movement of the pentane gas is something state officials wanted days ago. So what took so long? Lynn Kawano was at a press conference with the governor about that issue. Lynn.
Steph, it was clear Governor David Ige was not happy with the slow response from Puna Geothermal Venture. The governor announced he signed a supplemental emergency proclamation, which allows him to take action regarding private facilities like PGV. He says they want to work with PGV, but the removal of pentane gas should have been done last week.
Thursday and Friday of last week, we had already identified that as an issue and had made a request that they move it off-site as soon as possible.
And what was the reaction you got when you requested that right away?
They said they would get on it, and it's still on the site, and that's why I'm taking this action today.
A response team has been activated, including Big Island Mayor Harry Kim and PGV representatives. The state is also getting input from geothermal experts on the mainland. The state says there is no immediate danger right now, but the movement of the pentane gas has been expedited and should be off-site by tomorrow. I'm Lynn Kawano, Hawaii News Now.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. Well, geologists warned that there could be explosive eruptions at Hale Ma'uma'u crater at Kilauea.
That's after an explosion happened this morning, sending massive plumes of dark ash into the air. Mahea Lani Richardson joins us live at the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park with the details. Mahea.
Aloha, Steph and Sean. Yes, I'm here at the overlook of Hale Ma'uma'u crater, and it is safe, according to officials. They say there's no danger here, and that's why many areas of the park are still open. Now, behind me, you see a white plume right behind me, and it's been going strong all day today. This has been pretty normal. It's going strong. But earlier today, something really dramatic happened. Now, USGS says at 8:25 this morning, there were some rocks that fell into the lava lake below, and that caused a gas explosion, and then large plumes of dark steam and gas and dust went up into the air, maybe more than 1,000 feet. Measurements haven't been taken yet, but it was really...
We'll lead the coverage. This was by Hawaii News Now in Hawaii. And it was, let me see when it was posted. Today, actually, it was updated on the 10th. It was first, oh, I see. Yeah, the 10th today. It was updated at 3:18 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so it's actually a 10-day... started out on May the 1st, so 10-day updating here of the news from Hawaii News Now. It's only 75 degrees there, according to what we can see in Hawaii. It is a little interesting to get the coverage out of Hawaii on this volcano, because otherwise we get sort of sketchy stuff. We'll move to the sports now, and as we let's see, the no-hitter by Mr. Paxton, that was on a Tuesday. Seattle was playing the Blue Jays. I believe we had, he's bringing that one up here so we can get his no-hitter in here. Greatness has always been in James Paxton. This is from the Seattle Times, where we originally found it in the no-hitter. James Paxton, it seems, has always been unfulfilled, is about to be an unfulfilled potential, fueled by tantalizing glimpses of greatness and maddening injuries that have stymied him. He's never quite been able to step full on. Paxton developed a star right in the front of our eyes. That's a no-hitter here for the Mariners. Something Honga led the way that Felix Hernandez had rescinded from the role. Anyway, 16 strikeout efforts over a shutout ending in Paxton. Last start with the A's. He's had a good year, and on Tuesday came a piece of de resistance, a no-hitter against the Blue Jays in Toronto. Incidentally, James Paxton is a Canadian. He's from Vancouver. He pitched 99 pitches, made it just the 15th of 299 Major League no-hitters in history to come under 100 pitches. That's an interesting note there. You can sense that Paxton figuring it out, processing the algebra of how to harness a fastball. It reaches 100 miles per hour with the adrenaline of the ninth inning. No doubt, very, very difficult to beat. Sandy Koufax's career was progressing aimlessly until he famously had a conversation during their 61 exhibition game with his catcher Norm Sherry, who urged Koufax to take time or take something off his fastball to ensure better control. Randy Johnson was just as famously credited a conversation with none other than old Nolan Ryan, the fireball himself, in 1992, were helping him to wipe his brain around what it took to succeed in the majors. Paxton is all ready to follow those fellow lefties into the Hall of Fame. He's a left-hand pitcher, and he is a Canadian, and he threw his no-hitter in Canada, all across the Puget Sound. I'm kind of skipping around here. TV signaled in dismay with the realization that no-hitter surely would have been broken. But Seager, Dwayne Wise moment, a reference to the ninth inning leaping catch by the White Sox outfielder that preserved Mark Bruller's perfect game in 2009. We don't get too many of those. Paxton was still throwing smoke in the ninth, and only real scare came the last out by Josh Davidson, a former MVP, and still a tough out, there, Paxton and the Mariners. So something good coming out of coming out there from the PI, that's the Post-Intelligentsia out there. No Canadian, Mariner, Paxton, pinch hits no-hitter in Toronto is their headline. Basically the same thing here. This is from the Associated Press. He's 29 years old, lefty from British Columbia. That was at the Rogers Center there in Toronto. Toronto had been held without a home run in back-to-back games for the first time this season. Anyway, they call it power outage. We'll leave it at that and go to ESPN. There was not a lot of activity last night. Nothing in the NHL, nothing there. But the Celtics eliminated the 76ers. That was the game, 114 to 112. It was pretty much the end of it there, and that's about it. The Red Sox didn't do as well in Yankee Stadium, 9-6 with the score there. Let me just get to the scores from last night in 10. The Mets were in Cincy, Reds 2-1. Cleveland was in Milwaukee, Cleveland 6-2. And another 10-inning game, the Tigers were in Texas, Rangers 5-4. The Pirates were on the south side of Chicago. Pirates 6-5 over the White Sox. The Marlins were in Wrigley Field. Cubs finally win one, 13-4. Do the line score on this one. The Marlins had 8 hits and no errors, and the Cubs had 17 hits and no errors there. The Angels and Rockies in Denver. Rockies were shut out. Angels 8-0. And the Astros and Athletics out in Oakland. Astros 4-1. the Red Sox and Yankees in New York. It was a pretty even game there, basically speaking, up until the late innings. Nonetheless, the Yankees ended up 9-6. The line score there, Boston 12 hits and 1 error, and the Yankees 12 hits and no error. The Royals and Orioles in Camden Yards. The Orioles finally came up with one, 5-3. The Giants and Phillies in Philadelphia. Phillies 11-3 over the Giants. And the Mariners and Blue Jays. Blue Jays win this one 5-2, I suppose, revenge for the no-hitter. Atlanta and the Rays in Florida. Atlanta 5-2. The Nationals and Padres out in San Diego. Padres 2-1. And finally, the D-backs and Dodgers in Los Angeles. Dodgers 6-3. Kenley Jansen finally gets a win there. So that is Major League Baseball. That is sports. The title of our episode, Oil and Money. And we spent some time on the economic considerations there. And the new conflict that's heating up in the Mideast between Iranian forces supposedly in Syria and the Israeli defense forces. The Iranians say that, and there are two stories there, that the missiles that fell in the Golan Heights there were a response from the defense forces in Syria. So to sort all of this out, Bibi Netanyahu appears at the Victory Day celebration, the 73rd anniversary of the USSR at the time, Soviet Union's victory over fascism. Very interesting situation, him being there. So there are a lot of machinations around this entire situation. And also from the Democratic Republic of Korea, there were 3 people freed there as supposedly a jester. DJ Trump, of course, playing that up. And one last note here, there's some commentary. I think it was Robin Wright, but anyway, writing in the New Yorker, she's been around since, as LBJ would say, Christ was a proverbial corporal. Anyway, writing on foreign policy. DJ Trump's use of foreign policy, remember Tricky Dick, Nixon used foreign policy. He opened up China and met with, at the time, the premier of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev, all during a Watergate. But after different measurements there, it was spotlighted in newspapers at the time and on there, but not so much in social media. Where this will land, as they say, is very, very difficult to say. And our next broadcast, I assume, which will be, we're on a Thursday here, will be a Friday Jobber. We'll talk more about this and some of the polling that has been occurring lately. We talked about polling last week on, I believe it was a week, but it was. We brought up some polling. We spotlighted Rasmussen and what they claimed was a big lie about their polling. But again, it's the way that polling is done. All polls are weighted, there's no doubt about that. And if you have an outliner that is continuing outliner like Rasmussen, that the averages, that's why we always advise people to be very, very cautious when looking at the averaging of polls. That's one of the problems that tripped it up a lot of people during the 2016 election between Hillary Rodham Clinton and DJ Trump. And also in those battleground states. There's no doubt 2 or 3 points DJ Trump is up. How this will take care of his many other problems there is to be seen. But we at this mic had always discounted the so-called Russian connection, but it was sort of, in our opinion, downgraded by the Cambridge Analytica, who incidentally went bankrupt and no longer around anymore. They went out with, what was it, Storm, anyway, whatever the white supremacist site was there. That also disappeared in the airwaves. So some of those are the side issues. Where will this thing go? Will Putin, as defined by the Jerusalem Post, I think it's Jerusalem Post, is the man to take care of all this because he has relations with Tehran. The U.S. does not have to. And with the Syrians, yes, there could be a peace deal made in the Mideast. We've always looked at that as possible. Could DJ Trump pull up? Yes. The key to that one is to bring the Palestinians on board, and Netanyahu and his gang will, as they say, follow the leader. What type of peace operation it would be? Well, probably very tenuous, but nonetheless they call it a peace deal, and they say PR goes on. But that's in the field of foreign relations. Where it will impact in the U.S. Politic is how the economy does, particularly if petrol prices rise and how long they rise. That's dependent. If, in other words, if gas is up around, we didn't check with Gas Buddy here, but we'll do that tomorrow, is around a gallon in Europe, a liter, and how long it stays up, because the way these commodity contracts are set up, it could go up, come down. But remember, the energy sector, which supported DJ Trump, they would like to have $100 a barrel. How long they can maintain that, particularly north of that, between 10 and 20, that would be 110, 120, if they get that far along, till they run into literally roadblocks. In other words, people quit buying the commodity. Then, of course, it comes down from an unnatural level at that point in time. We'll have more of that on This Week in Economics as some of the numbers coming out. We'll also have an open source report. We were hoping to have one last week, but sometimes how things come about. We've been traveling some this week. Good day.